The Ottawa Senators had their season come to an end the other day against the Carolina Hurricanes as they were swept in 4 games. It's unfortunate because I don't think anybody saw that coming with the way the Senators played down the stretch, and also the fact is, matchup wise, they seem to match up well with Ottawa. Them winning was a possibility, but Carolina winning the series was always probably more of the expected outcome. However, not in 4 games straight. This was definitely not one of those series that anybody expected in four. And to be fair, Ottawa had their chances. The games were pretty tight. It wasn't like they were outclassed by Carolina. They unfortunately just didn't have any bounces go their way. But now the season is over. They were the first team to be eliminated from the Stanley Cup playoffs, and there are some question marks heading into the offseason for the team. And in this video, we're going to kind of review some of those things to look out for and just kind of where the status is for the Senators going forward. Now, with the way the team is developed, or sorry, the roster is constructed, we know they're still going to try to compete for a playoff spot next season. In fact, they probably would have been higher up and not a wild card spot this year if it wasn't for the fact that their goaltending was so bad at the start of the year. They were one of the top, in terms of analytics, one of the top puck possession teams, and just drove a lot of play. Their lines were solid, and the goaltending was one of the worst tandems in the league. And that was with Linus Ullmark just sucking earlier in the year, and their backups not being any good either. When Ullmark took his mental health leave, eventually when he came back, he's also known to be a good regular season goalie and not do well in the playoffs. He actually did really well in the playoffs, and it's unfortunate that the offense just couldn't get going. Allmark had a goals against average of just over a little bit over 2, and his save percentage was like 93, 932. So he did his job. It's unfortunate that the offense couldn't get going, and they defensively did well. And there was a couple of things that worked against them. Could this series have shifted if Thomas Chabot was 100%? We knew he had that broken arm in March, and he came back from it after like 3 weeks with plates and screws put in his bone to keep it in place. But they lost Jake Sanderson, they lost Artem Zub in game one, and so that was pretty much their top pairing. Could the results have been different? Sure, they could probably won a game, maybe even two, to push it to 6 games. But Carolina winning, was again the expected outcome, and it's just unfortunate. So where does the Ottawa team go from here? Well, first off, the biggest question mark that is surrounding this team is going to be Brady Tkachuk, the captain. He still has 2 years remaining on his deal. He gets paid, $8.2 million and change per season. Obviously, salary is not an issue for the Senators. Salary cap wise, they're going to have about $17.2 million in cap space. In terms of unrestricted free agents, they have Claude Giroux, who is a veteran that if he wants to come back, it's going to depend on if he wants to be back. Lars Eller, Nick Cousins, Nick Jensen are some of the other more prominent free agents available, but there is no one that's a big name that's a free agent. So Giroux, if he wants to come back, they'll probably work out some sort of performance incentive contract for him. And if he calls it quits, then it's a great potential Hall of Fame career for Claude Giroux. He had a great career, and if he retires, then so be it. But I feel like he could probably still come back and contribute for the Senators. Now, the biggest advantage that the Sens have is they still have Ullmark locked up for several more seasons. So their goaltending, if they can address the backup and maybe bring back James Reimer, maybe not. Like, it all depends on what they want to do from a goalie perspective. But for defense, Jake Sanderson is there. They still have Thomas Chabot. And the one thing that GM Steve Staios has done is the contracts that they've currently signed with some of these guys, they're giving them modified no trade clauses. Ullmark and Brady Tkachuk, who obviously was signed by Pierre Dorian, has a no movement clause, but everybody else has a modified no trade clause. Dylan Cousins, who they acquired from the Sabres, obviously had his contract signed by Buffalo. Kevin Adams, sorry. So he already had a modified 5-team no trade list, whereas guys like Shane Pinto, Tim Stützle, they have modified 10-team no trade clauses, and Jake Sanderson doesn't have any trade protection until I think it's 2029, 2030. So the Senators' nucleus, like their core, is solid. One of the biggest advantages that they have that a lot of teams in the NHL don't have is they have a lot of good center depth. Not only is it good center depth, it's young center depth. Tim Stützle is an all-star, and he is still going to be the anchor of the top line. And then behind him, they have Dylan Cousins for the second line, and then Shane Pinto is their third line center. All three are locked up to long-term contracts, and they have that luxury that honestly not a lot of teams have that. There are very few teams that can match the depth that the Senators have down the middle in terms of safe contracts, age, upside. Like all three of those guys could have big years in the future, and this is not their ceiling. They can all improve. On the wing, Drake Batherson at least still has one more year. They still have Fabian Zetterlund, who I guess at 4.275 is a little bit overpaid for what he does, but he's again someone that could be elevated in the lineup and produce for them. Michael Amadio should be back. They still have Redley Grigg in terms of the wings, but the biggest question mark remains with Brady Tkachuk. And the question with Tkachuk is, does he want out? And he hasn't said anything about it, but everybody's kind of looking at the playbook with what happened with Matthew when he left Calgary. It's a little bit different. Brady has never said he's been getting along with the young guys from the start, and he always wanted to be captain. He was named captain. However, could the Senators change up the dynamic of their team by moving Brady? Because he brings a little bit of grit to that team where some of the other guys, Stützle plays more of a softer game, obviously. So it just, he's a finesse player. And so Brady helps change that up for that team in terms of the dynamic he offers. It also would be interesting in terms of perhaps exploring a trade market to see what kind of value is out there. Brady does have a no movement clause, so it's not like Ottawa controls the situation. And so if he wants to move, it's going to be under his desire and under his watch where he ends up going. And chances are, he'll probably want to maybe go to Florida, play with Matthew. It's going to be the usual suspects. It'll probably be Florida, Tampa, Dallas, Vegas, the no tax states. And if that happens, it's again going to create, there's no chance for a bidding war. It's going to be an underwhelming return, just like we've seen this play out for other guys when they want to trade. They narrow their preferred destinations, and in this case, when he has a no movement clause, it just makes it even tougher. So if Ottawa Senators were to approach Brady to ask him to waive, he's going to control where he goes. So right away, that's reduced in terms of leverage. If Brady comes to Steos and management and says, I want out, again, that's fine. He can get out, but again, he's in control. Like either way, Brady has all the leverage. And so now the thought is, does Ottawa hope that, he wants to stay? Because the ideal scenario is Brady is fine being in Ottawa and they run it back next season with the same group, and they still have so much cap space that they can address some of their issues, because there's also no one coming through the pipeline. When you look at their pipeline, Carter Yakimchuk should be a full-time player next year. He's only 20 years old, so of course could be an option. He ends up going to the, get sent down or something like that, but he should be a NHL regular next year, and he's shown that he can play there. And so between Chabot, with Chabot, and then you also got Sanderson there and Zub, and if they have Yakimchuk, that's a solid top four. What they want to do is probably address their fourth line spot. They can bring back Lars Eller if they want, if he wants to come back for the fourth line role in terms of faceoffs and all that. They should obviously upgrade on the wings. And then you could look at some teams where a potential trade is possible. Now, one team that immediately comes to mind, again, there's a few of these teams. The Flyers don't have a true number one center. The Flames don't have a true number one center. But what both those teams have is a lot of wingers. And that is somewhere where, fine, you're going to keep Brady. Do you want to take that risk and maybe trade a Cousins or a Pinto to land some more depth? And because the Flyers and Flames are two teams that come to mind that have excess amount of wingers, but they really are lacking down the middle. The Flames in particular have a lot of wingers that they could probably package up. And, getting a guy like Cousins or Shane Pinto for them, isn't the number one center compared to most other teams, but it's better than what they have now. And the same can be said for the Flyers. Shane Pinto or Dylan Cousins would help solidify, the Flyers down the middle. They have, Owen Tippett, Travis Konechny, and Matvey Michkov in terms of three solid right wings. Um, they just have a lot of wingers that they can probably package up and move. So that might be something to explore. There obviously could be other deals elsewhere that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. But does Ottawa want to do that? I personally, I think Ottawa is in a very envious position of having those three centermen down the middle. That if they were to move one, they can demand a king's ransom. Obviously, Stützle won't go anywhere. But if they wanted to, trade Cousins, elevate Pinto up, and acquire a third line guy through free agency or something else to fill that checking role, they could do that. So either way, the Senators' biggest question is Brady, and then maybe that is just more the media creating a narrative that doesn't exist, and Brady's fine being in Ottawa. And if he is, then Stales has one less issue to worry about in terms of any kind of headaches that come across with having to deal with Tkachuk wanting out. And if he's there, it's about how do they want to go about to build their team. The free agent market obviously is not what it used to be in terms of all the big names are ending up signing extensions where they are at, and in a few cases like Panarin get traded and then sign an extension there. So besides Alex Tuch, there really isn't anybody on the free agent market that's going to really appeal to the Senators. They don't have much in terms of prospect, right? After Yakimchuk, it's Logan Hensler, who was their pick last year. And then the other thing is, at least they got a first round pick back this year after the whole, Evgeny Dadonov fiasco of the whole no trade issue with Vegas. And so, unfortunately for them, they're the first team out. So it's not going to be the 17th overall pick, which is what it would have been if they had their own pick. It's still a first round pick, but it's going to be the very last one, which is 32nd overall. So they get a pick there. They'll get a guy to add to their pipeline, but there's no one else coming up that really is going to be a needle mover for the Senators. So what they need to do is figure out how they want to build their team. Once they know what's going on with Brady, they could pretty much run it back, maybe upgrade their goalie, get another veteran backup for now, and let Marilainen kind of, marinate in the minors for another season at least. And they probably need to address a top four, maybe get somebody with size to play defense on the back end there. And they could probably get one or two wingers they need. Once they also know what they want to do with Claude Giroux, is he back, is he not? And the Senators should again be in the battle for a playoff spot. Now, being in the division that they're in, don't forget that some of the up and coming teams that they made the playoffs with this year, of course, Buffalo back, Montreal again building, Detroit just missed, and Tampa's going to be competitive again, and Florida will rebound. I mean, that's kind of a given. Everybody's expecting Florida to be back in the playoffs next season, and we don't know what happens with Toronto, but with Austin Matthews, John Tavares, and William Nylander there, they're probably going to look to just retool and get back in. So it's going to be ultra competitive next year in their division. So the Senators are getting back to the playoffs is no sure thing. However, they have a strong core that they should be able to compete and be right up in the mix until the end. And then it could be how this year was, where they could end up fighting for the division. They could be fighting for a wild card spot. Like, it's hard to say. But the Senators have a good thing going. And as much as it sucks to lose again in the first round after losing to the Leafs last year, I do think the Senators have the pieces to make the playoffs. And then if they build and make the right moves in the offseason, they could be a contender next year, a team that actually can advance past the first round if Brady is still there. So catch you guys later.